All right, well, let's get started. For everyone on the phone, thanks so much for joining us today for our webinar called Sampling for CRM Acquisition, How Brands Are Using Sampler to Build Long-Lasting Relationships. During the webinar, if you would like to share your experience or any insight that you have or that anything you're learning on social media, you can by using the hashtag digital sampling. And also by mentioning Sampler with the @ at Sampler Business. You can definitely connect with us on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn. So today I'm excited to be your host. My name is Marie Chevrier and I'm the founder of Sampler. At Sampler, we have been in the product sampling space now for 6 years, helping brands of all shapes and sizes and certainly of every category distribute product samples in a more effective way. And what's really exciting today, what we're going to be focused on is really the power of sampling for CRM. And I think that the first place to start is really to start talking about the importance of CRM. If we quickly think about the marketing funnel, and I've written here CPG marketing funnel, but I think that the marketing funnel for many different categories is pretty similar, where ultimately everything starts with awareness, with a target audience that the brand is looking to get after. And as we know that these target markets are getting a little bit more segmented every day now as there's more and more competition in the consumer packaged goods space for very, very specific products. I'm talking about, organic kombucha products or all these various different types of products that are coming along. So the first step for every brand, it doesn't matter how narrow or large your market is about driving awareness. And awareness is just people noticing that you exist. So that's the first step. And then what we find after that is that brands are needing to really position themselves as to why are they different? So if you're inventing the brand new ketchup, how is your ketchup different than the leading brands? Third thing we find is that we need to allow the consumer to experience and to ultimately try and consume your product. And that's obviously where sampling becomes quite important. Most important, I think, step of all of this is this validation phase where a consumer makes their mind up on whether or not you're going to be the product that they're going to be using and whether or not they agree with your brand promise and the differentiation points that you have highlighted before. And then if all goes well, the consumer will also go into the adoption phase. That's when you become the brand of pasta that they eat every single week when they're thinking about making spaghetti meatballs. It's your brand that they go after. And we see that often where brands are really, really good at potentially driving that experience and validation, but where they really need help is on building that pattern behavior of buying that product often. And then the last and most ultimate step that we all want for every single consumer that we acquire is bringing them to that loyalty phase or that moment of advocacy where they love your brand so much that they want to scream about it at the top of buildings. And so ultimately the big learning here is we all learned this in business school. Nothing's changed. The consumer is still looking to go through all of these different steps, or we're all looking to get that consumer to go through these different steps. Yet we are being challenged as marketers in our ability to do that via traditional channels. And I think it's pretty logical that we will need to have a direct-to-consumer relationship today in order to be able to drive that consumer across all these different steps. And that's where the importance of CRM comes into play, because it is a lot easier for a marketer that has the ability to stay in touch with the consumer to drive that consumer through all those steps than it might be if they didn't. And so some of the recent news that we're having is actually a great example of why brands should be investing in CRM. The news came out yesterday that Amazon actually had changed their search algorithm in ways that actually boost their own private label products instead of playing fairly. So what that means is that brands are potentially advertising on Amazon, or potentially are performing quite well on Amazon, but still are at a disadvantage on the platform. And I mean, how are we surprised, right? I mean, in a way, this is the exact same thing that brands encountered in our traditional retail channels. And ultimately, it's just another reminder that brands are going to have to build these direct-to-consumer relationships if what they want is to ultimately grow and prosper. So here, let's go directly into some of the things that we've learned about the current strategies for brands that brands are using in order to drive CRM. So the reality is that if you think about it, 92% of the shoppers that go to your website, your direct-to-consumer website, are actually not ready to buy. So what I mean by that is there's 92% of your organic traffic that goes to your website that is not ready to transact with you. And that means that for that 92%, they will not be providing any level of information for you to actually continue the conversation. And so brands have often tried to drive maybe incentives or things that can allow consumers to, or incent consumers to leave information behind. But the reality is that when we're talking to our brands and they're talking to us about the CRM or email newsletter signups on their websites, they're seeing less than 5% of their website views convert to a CRM registration. So what we've found is that one of the best ways to incent consumers is actually to give a sample incentive, a free sample incentive, or a high value incentive. In fact, our own programs have shown that we can drive a 5 to 10x increase in conversion to CRM if we offer a free product sample in exchange for an email. And so that's really what we do with Sampler. Sampler helps brands leverage product experiences so that they can actually build one-to-one relationships with consumers. Sampler's worked with over 30 of the top 100 CPGs, and in total over 300 different brands over the last several years. And we've learned a ton about how you can leverage sampling for CRM. So I hope to share some of our best practices today. As a quick high-level view of Sampler, we help brands develop digital product sampling programs that can actually live in two ways. The first way is the sampler exchange, where brands come to us and say, we would like to tap into Sampler's existing database of consumers. And it's a very, very unique audience that we've built. We've built a network of 50 million consumers across North America who come to Sampler because they're interested in discovering new products. And how we've acquired them is via partnerships with some of the leading online publishers. The second way that we work with brands is through Sampler Enterprise, which basically integrates into a brand's own advertisement. So it's basically any advertisement that they might be running. It could be a Twitter ad, it could be an Instagram ad, it could be a search ad. It doesn't matter where, but ultimately they go through the experience of creating a Sampler account, creating an account that will allow the brand to ensure that they are a unique consumer, and then they fill a very quick questionnaire that tells the brand a little bit more about who they are. So in this case, we're talking about a L'Oreal skincare brand, and what they want to do is they want to ask consumers about their skin type. Once the consumer confirms their skin type, they match with a sample that matches their skin type and ultimately provide their shipping information so that Sampler can get to work and ship a sample directly to a consumer's home. What's really amazing about this is that it's a fully turnkey program. So marketers can actually work with Sampler on a fully turnkey, all-inclusive cost that includes finding the right consumers and actually shipping a sample directly to home. But if we go back to that marketing funnel that we were talking about at the beginning, it doesn't stop here. The first 3 steps of our marketing funnel drove us through awareness to ultimately differentiation and trial. And that's what Sampler has done with this quick steps, these few quick steps of finding the right consumers, shipping them a sample, and letting them try. But where the real magic happens is in the follow-up and in the continued conversation we're going to be having with these consumers. So when the consumer receives a sample at home, we obviously give them a little time to try the product. And after they have, we follow up with them and ask them feedback about the product. Obviously, one of the things we can certainly do is ask them a question like a quick rating and review. So give us the 5-star rating, give us a quick comment about how you felt about the product, potentially even product recommendations. We found some incredible stuff about products, like, for example, a brand that had reduced the size of their granola bars, and immediately the consumers noticed that the packaging had certainly been impacted. So this is incredibly valuable in having this two-way communication. The other thing that's really great about the platform is that in real time, you can actually see the impact of your campaign and gather all the insights in real time. So you can see things like how many samples did I deliver, who did I deliver them to, and ultimately you can actually make decisions on how you want to continue the conversation with consumers. One of my favorite use cases is when brands start seeing that potentially some of the users they were going after initially, maybe they find an actual better segment within that audience. So a brand might come to us and say that they want to reach organic mom Susie, for example, but all of a sudden, as they go through the motions with Sampler, they quickly realize that where that consumer shops becomes more important versus maybe being organic. So these types of findings can allow us to continue even further the conversation. So another thing that you can do is you can leverage the platform to go back to consumers and start asking other questions, like for another product sample or for a larger product, tell us a little bit more about where you use that product. Tell us a little bit more about in which occasion would this product be more relevant to you. So we become ultimately almost kind of your consumer research tool as well. As we continue the experience, I'll just quickly recap some of the big steps. So going back to that marketing funnel, the first touch point is a sample, but after that, we send education content, follow-up content that helps really push the brand's differentiation. Then we go into product feedback and we talk about ratings and reviews. And then when we feel like the consumer is ready for that purchase, we go ahead and we pass on a follow-up coupon that will drive them to purchase and enable the brand to actually measure the impact of that sample all the way to their D2C channel or even their traditional retail channels. So I hope that's been helpful so far. I'm going to definitely allow for questions in a few minutes, but the results certainly speak for themselves when it comes to digital sampling for CRM. If you think of the impact that Sampler can have across all those different steps, I think the largest one is the fact that we can guarantee that 100% of your product trials will end up going to a targeted and unique household. The second thing is you can expect 50%, so 1 out of 2 of every single consumer you sample to convert to your CRM. And so if your goal is to drive a consumer to your CRM, if you do the math with that $3 that we have on the right side, which is the average all-in cost for digital sampling, you are paying approximately $6 a lead, a highly qualified lead that has tried your sample directly at home. And what's great is that 1 out of 3 of those consumers will come back and give you feedback. And so this won't be just, typical feedback like 5-star, 3-star, but it will also be very, very strong product insights as far as, what is it exactly that they liked and that they didn't like. And ultimately that can be driven into your large ambitions around personalization, and you can continue the conversation to really address those concerns later on in the marketing funnel. But the really striking thing for me when we started this was the fact that I know, and we all know, that brands will spend up to $30 to drive a click in the CPG industry with a consumer who's in market for a specific product. I see this all the time. Brands paying for people that are looking for wrinkle cream, $30 a click. Think about the impact of one product sample versus one click. We can drive 10 product samples with the same budget as one click. And that's where it became really, really striking. And people always ask me, oh, Marie, that seems like crazy. Like, how is it that that's possible? And the reason is because consumers are willing to share their personal data in exchange for an incentive. If I get something from sharing my data with you, and if that something is a high value product sample that is relevant to me, I am a lot more willing to engage with your brand and share my personal data. And that's the magic of product sampling. Do we have any questions on functionality? So you can actually submit your questions. It'll be on the right side of the screen. You should be able to submit. All right, so we have a question coming in. And the question is around the types of consumers that we can reach. And so maybe a little bit more, I guess, on the types of consumers that are part of our database. So the first finding that you'll find is that certainly when it comes to gender, there is a bias when it comes to product sampling. We do find that there's a lot more popularity with product sampling with women than there might be with men. But the good news is that other than that, we found that we've been able to find a high level of engagement nationally in both the US and Canada. And because consumers are constantly answering questions, for example, what type of skin do you have? How would you describe your skin? Or how many kids do you have? We can actually kind of create an unlimited amount of targeting criteria, and we can learn a lot about our audiences. So I'd say we have a lot of women that are interested in learning more about products. We certainly have men as well, but otherwise though, we can really narrow down into pretty much any audience you'd like to go into, and that's super, super exciting for sure. Another question was, what are some best practices and long-term strategies for CRM? So I'm actually going to share some best practices and case studies as we go a little deeper. But I'll say that my biggest point of advice is start small. So for a lot of the big companies that we're talking to, or even the small companies, I think we all have large aspirations on the power of personalization or the power of retargeting and all these things. And all you need to start with is to start with collecting the data and making sure you're collecting the right data that is most valuable to you and not over collecting. So, if you have a form, for example, maybe you don't need to ask 10 questions, maybe you can keep it simpler. And then from there, what you're trying to do is personalization, maybe don't go crazy on the personalizations, but you can even start with as simple as, in the case of maybe a free sample that follows content, did this person have a positive experience, yes or no? The message you send to a consumer who had a positive experience versus the message you send to a consumer who had a negative experience obviously needs to be so different. And so I always say to people, if we spent as much intention not talking to the people who said no as we do to talking to people who said yes, it would be very, very important. So what I mean by that is, if a consumer has had a negative experience with you and you've gathered their feedback, stop advertising to that consumer and concentrate on the types of consumers that have a positive experience with you, and you will be a lot more efficient than most advertisement campaigns. All right, so let's go into some key insights. So one, offering a free product sample will increase your ad click-through rate. So that's actually a really interesting case study. We've done some work with Nescafe and Snapchat, and when they actually worked with us, they saw that consumers were 42% more likely to click through if they saw a free product sample versus an ad that had only a call to action to the brand's website with no incentive. We also saw that a free product sample that is organically offered on a brand's website, and that doesn't need to be driven by media, just organically a consumer goes on the website and is offered an incentive to fill a diagnostic or a quiz, that will drive a sampling call to action will drive a 7 times higher conversion. The other thing is that offering a free product sample will drop your cost per lead down. So we had done a great experiment with our partners at Henkel when they were launching a brand new shampoo in market, and what they found is that their cost per lead was 39% less expensive with a sample. And I'm including the cost of producing and shipping a sample directly to home. So quickly talked about the case study with Nescafe, but this is the call to action that they actually had on Snap. As I mentioned earlier, the consumer was able to swipe up and ultimately claim their sample directly on the platform. So continuing into the other case study, which I chatted about quickly, was the La Roche-Posay case study, which basically showed that when there's a sampling CTA on a quiz, consumers are 7 times more likely to complete that quiz, and 57% of consumers that completed that quiz actually converted to actually proposing or giving their email. 57%, and this is a French, so it's a case study from France. And as we know, with the GDPR rules and everything, European consumers are even more conservative in actually sharing their data. So this was a really amazing program. And so not only that, but consumers noted the experience of going through that quiz and receiving that free product recommendation with a 92% net promoter score. And that's obviously quite exciting. And that was 41% higher than the experience that was given before, which was a product recommendation without a free sample. So similarly, quickly chatted about the Nature Box and Henkel promotion that they did, but 68% of consumers agreed to register to the CRM after receiving a sample incentive. That is really, really high, 68%, 33% lower cost per email than the brand's current strategies. And this included the cost of producing the sample at $1. And then the brand was able to collect 7 or more data points on every single consumer. 1 out of 3 consumers ended up converting to the brand's ratings and review program. And ultimately, 1 out of 3 reported a positive intent to purchase. And all this information is helping the brand continue to make decisions on how they are going to be moving that consumer down the marketing funnel. And I think that's a really good time to remind everybody of the importance of that, of going through every single one of those steps and thinking through that all of your consumers will not be at the same stage in that funnel, and that we need to start thinking about that funnel more actively and personalizing the communication based on where that consumer is. And that's one of the things that the program can do. So there's been a lot of different best practices shared today, but to recap with a couple others, I've already kind of chatted about that, but the very most important insight you can get from product feedback is the likelihood to purchase. So 1 out of 3 consumers who try a sample come back and answer a simple question for us: yes or no. Do you like this product? Yes or no. As CPG companies, we are in the business of ultimately scaling our relationships. We can make a choice. Should we continue to try and win a consumer who's already made their opinion? Or should we double down on the consumer, and if that opinion is negative? Or should we double down on a consumer who's had a positive experience and is not yet converted to a full purchase? The answer is very clear. You should double down on the consumer who is interested in your product, and just getting the consumer to that consideration point as early as you possibly can will save you dollars and will save you time. And so what we recommend our brands that are maybe not at the level of personalization, optimal level of personalization, is to simply ask, did you enjoy your product? Yes or no. If you did, you go into a list of consumers that are going to be retargeted, that we're going to continue to spend money on advertising to. And if you said no, we will certainly ask for your feedback, but ultimately we will not be wasting more media dollars trying to convert you, because there is no better way to make your opinion than tasting or feeling or smelling the product. The second thing is that you should leverage sampling to really centralize and standardize your data collection. What we've found is that brands go into these CRM projects with either very big ambitions on the number of data points they want to collect, or very simple ambitions. And sampling can help you think about the data points that matter. If we run together a sampling program that allows you to quickly identify that although you thought organic Susie was your target market, we found that actually organic Max is actually more likely to convert, we will be able to come to that learning together in a matter of 30 to 90 days. And we will be able to scale that and confirm that that actually works at 1,000 samples, or at 1,000 consumers, to 100,000 consumers, to 1 million consumers. And at that point, as you are learning, you're also learning about what are the data points that I need to know. And so, for example, for a baby brand, I might be really curious about if a consumer is expecting, or I might be very curious about other things, but I'm not necessarily, I don't need to potentially worry about every single data point. And so it's a really good way to really centralize your data collection, make sure that it's happening in the same way across every consumer. It's a really good way to get a good base of first party data. And so I definitely think, we'd love to help you think through those. So at this point, it's 3:35, and so we do have a little bit more time to answer any questions if there's some last questions. And I actually saw a couple, so that's great. Good. So someone asked, I'm assuming a smaller brand, she said, you say start small. What's a good number of samples to start with for a small brand? So that's a great question. I mean, for us, statistical significance is definitely something to consider here. Statistical significance is usually in the mid thousands, like so around 500 to 1,000 samples, but we believe that you get the most out of your sampling program when you start around 3,000. Because at 3,000, what we can do together is we can actually start running either different waves of samples. So a best practice would be to potentially start with a wider group of consumers and identifying the types of consumers that react really well, and then doing a second more narrow wave and then a third more narrow wave to really jot down. Another way would be to start with 3,000 at the beginning, but in parallel test your few target markets that you've identified and one representative set of the population. So you might say, I want to A/B test, is my target market actually, or my own made up in a way, like target market, really the one I'm going after, and how does that compare to how my program performs with a representative set of the population? Great. Another question, can you reach consumers with specific diets? That's a great question. Yeah, absolutely. So cosmetic companies and food companies are actually our most popular categories. And what we find is oftentimes brands that come to us love coming to us because they're looking to reach a consumer who's gluten-free, vegan, potentially their products has benefits across different specialty diets. And that's absolutely one of the things that we collect data about. So we ask every single consumer who creates a sampler account what their diet is and to tell us a little bit more. And that information also can be integrated into your CRM. So this is data that you can make sure is part of your data strategy as you start to scale the way that you'll continue to communicate with these consumers. Perfect. Any other last questions? Oh, actually, we got one more questions. We got one question that just came out, sorry. We got a question around pharma products. So definitely some restrictions on pharma products, the same that you would get as far as your ability to distribute kind of over the counter or not. But we have definitely found great ways to work with companies that are OTC. So certainly would be interested to learn more about the brand you're working on. And depending on the category, we'd be very happy to help for sure. We've had great success with many different big conglomerates in the pharma space and smaller brands. Perfect. It seems like we're truly done now. So thank you so much once again. I'm Marie Chevrier. I hope that after this you connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have any other questions also, I'm available at marie@sampler.io. Otherwise, do visit our website, and thanks for being with us today.